Deb, and your committee that helped you put this together. This may be the most successful reunion we've ever had. And goodness knows we've had a lot of them, so thank you. The Kotula family, we trace back to the 14th century. And they lived in a little village close to Kiev in the Ukraine. Because of religious persecution by the Russians, they moved to Czechoslovakia. And in those days, in the 15th, 16th century, the new rulers used to chase those people across the Carpathian Mountains. So the Kotula family eventually settled and probably spent more time in Austria, in a little town called Cryz, and how you pronounce that, I don't know. But how is it? Siddich, okay, that's where we settled. Big Pete Kotula's father came to this country in 1880, and that started the Kotula family in the United States. Big Pete Kotula was born in 1890 and married Anna Kotula, who was born in 1893. They had 10 children. Big Pete Kotula was 6'5" and 250 pounds. And he was a man who lit up a room when he came into the room. There used to be a picture on the wall here. He used to carry the flag for the Greek Catholic Union. It looked like he was on a riser, but he was on his flat feet, and all these little guys that were in the Union were next to him. They were all short and small. Anyway, I have to tell you about the relationship between Stan Musial and Big Pete. Stan Musial, for those of you who don't know, is a great baseball player. He's from Donora, PA, but he married a girl by the name of Lillian LaBoche from Clairton. Lillian LaBoche was Big Pete's cousin, and she loved Big Pete because he lit up a room when he came into the room. And the story goes that they were at a funeral in Clairton, I believe, and Stan Musial was there, and Big Pete said to him, "Stanley, me boy." That's what he called him, Stanley, me boy. These baseball players today aren't as good as the old-timers like Cobb and Ruth and Hornsby and all those guys. And Stan says, you know, Big Pete, we have some pretty good baseball players now. Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, all those guys are all good baseball players. And Big Pete just shook it and said, they're not as good as the old-timers. But anyway, Big Pete was an electrician in the mines. And the guy, my grandfather from the other side, was the mine superintendent. Tommy Collins, an Irishman. We used to like to start fights. Anyway, Big Pete was an electrician, and he trained both of my uncles from the other side to be electricians. But he was a very accomplished electrician. Anyway, they settled here. I think they originally were from Eleanor, but settled in Adrian because, you know, this name of this town is not Adrian. It's DeLancey. The post office is DeLancey. Well, why do they call it Adrian? Because the Islands were a multi-million-dollar family from New York City who started all these mining towns in western PA, and they made many more millions in the mines. Anyway, they used to reserve the right to name the mine, so they named this mine Adrian after Adrian Island. And the baseball team, which was among the best in the coal mining towns, wore Adrian on the uniform, so that's how this town became known as Adrian. Anyway, Big Pete and Nana had 10 kids. They lived in a little house on the other side of this square, had 2 bedrooms. Big Pete and Nana stayed in one bedroom, and then 10 kids stayed in the other bedroom. And I had the opportunity to sleep in that bedroom a number of times. Of course, a lot of the older guys were gone by then, but it was just like the Army, a lot of snoring. Anyway, Anna Kotula was a lady in her own right. Born in 1893 and died in 1949. She was 49 years old, so figure that out. 10 kids. She used to bake at least 8 loaves of bread 4 or 5 times a week. She used to hide it because the kids would come in and they'd get into the bread. But she was a marvelous cook. I remember going picking wild mushrooms with her in the woods. And then we'd have them with scrambled eggs, and they were delicious. But great cook, but she was a hard worker. She didn't have a washing machine like you all have now. She didn't have a bathroom. She had an outhouse. But she raised 10 kids, and you can be proud of your legacy, of all your fathers and mothers, because it was a great family, great family. As I recall, there were a number of things that they had in mind. Number one, first was family. Number two was the church and religion. Number three was music. Number four was baseball. And number five was hunting. And we used to meet every year around those occasions. And someone said, did you always have reunions? I'm going to be 81 years old, and as long as I can remember, we had reunions. Not here all the time. We used to have them down in what they called the Pines. We used to have them at Phil Kotula's house. We used to have them at other places throughout the area. But we always had, beg pardon?
Out there, out that back road of Oneida, we used to go there too.
Somewhere up around Oneida. Anyway, but probably John Mark at the stump. Where's John Mark?
Outside.
He's outside, okay. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the family. I told you what a hard worker Big Pete was, and also Anna Kotula. We called Big Pete Pa, as did his kids. The grandchildren called Anna Bubba, but the kids called her Ma. So Ma and Pa were the names that they used. And Verna is here, and Verna's mother was Aunt Mary DeLancey. She was Bubba Kotula's sister. She used to make the best pagach ever in Adrian. Right, Verna? Let's talk a little bit about the family. I told you we used to, the religion, the churches was always a big part of the family, always. And music. The boys used to sing, and they used to sing a cappella. And I'll tell you, they were good. Fred was the bass. Dan was the lead. Dan was a great singer, and the rest of my father sang the high part, and the rest of them tuned in, but they could really sing. And Liz, Debbie's mother, who became the matriarch when Bubba Kotula died at the age of 49, was a great singer. That's when the church used to have a big choir, but she had a beautiful singing voice. Let's talk a little bit about the family. John, my father, was the eldest, and he was a good friend of Andy Colson. If you go to church tomorrow, you'll see Tommy Colson there probably. Tommy Colson's a retired state trooper. But my father, they called Yunk, and Andy Colson never met a fight that they didn't like. I mean, in the old days in the mining town, fighting was a way of life. And of course, my father and Andy Colson used to take care of all the younger kids. No one could pick on because there was the Greek town and there was the Roman town, which was up above. And there was a lot of competition, so eventually a lot of fighting. Fred, my father was the eldest, and he was a miner. He had to drop out of high school when he was 15 to work, to support the family. They bought a piano. They used the piano as part of their repertoire when they had get-togethers. Fred Kotula was tall and handsome. He probably was the best hunter of the family. Big Fred carried this little, I think 30, but he'd go out, right away he'd buy a deer, or get a deer. And I was amazed at how lucky he was, or how good he was at shooting deer. But he was a good baseball player also. The third person was Pete Kotula, who many of the women, Verna, you probably remember this, they thought he was Rudolph Valentino. You younger people don't remember, but Rudolph Valentino was a heartthrob. Well, Pete Kotula was a Rudolph Valentino of his time, very handsome man. Pete Kotula was wounded in North Africa in World War II. They put him back into battle, and he was wounded in Italy. Earned 2 Purple Hearts. I don't know where those Purple Hearts are now. But Pete never married, but always had a lot of girlfriends. But he was in Cleveland, and he developed some problems because he had sugar diabetes. And he went to the VA hospital. They took his kidney out. And he kept drinking, partying. And we found out after he died that they took the kidney out by mistake. And the family, I think Phil took care of this. Phil took charge, and the family settled for I don't know what. But,
yeah, Carl did too.
Carl, okay.
Because we were out
anyway, Pete was quite a guy, and And then after Pete was Big Dan. His name was Robert Kotula. They called him Dan because I think it was Johnny Simbo. Sim named him Deacon Dan, so they called him Dan. But Dan was a great athlete. He served in World War II for 5 years and was stationed close to London and played football and baseball with all the professional athletes. Dan Kotula kicked the winning extra point for the 8th Air Force against the 2nd Army in front of 100,000 GIs in Wembley Stadium. And all the players, professional players, wanted him to go and play baseball or football in the pro leagues, but he said, when this thing's over, meaning the war, I'm not going to go too far east or west of Mahoning Street in Punxsutawney, PA. And he never did, but Dan was the singer in the family. He had a beautiful singing voice, and he was a mountain of a man. The old steel beer cans, he could crush them in his hands, flatten them out. He was that strong. But he was hit some long home runs, and I was at a game in Elk Run, and he hit the ball into the, I guess it's Mahoning Creek down at Elk Run. You can't see the baseball field now. It was so long that some guys got into a canoe, went out, and they measured it 603 feet. Now but he hit some long home runs. If you're down here at this ball field, it's not a softball field, you'll see all railroad tracks way out above. He used to hit home runs over those railroad tracks. And he was invited to all the small picnics here. Every church, every town had their picnic. You could be sure that Bob or Dan Kotula was there because he'd lead them in singing. He had a beautiful singing voice, and he was just great. Next before Dan was Liz. After Pete was Elizabeth Kotula. Liz really was the take charge person in the family after Bubba Kotula died, and put together all these get-togethers and took care of the boys, make sure that they stayed in line. And Liz was a wonderful person, died much too young, but a great lady and another great singing voice. Okay, who do we go to next? We have Liz and then Dan. George Kotula was in the Coast Guard, and George also was a baseball player. He played third base for Adrian, could hit the ball a long way, but he married Irene Shyok, and the Shyok family were great baseball players. There was Happy and Willie, and I don't know how many more Shyoks, but they were all played on the Adrian baseball team, and they were great baseball players. But George was in the Coast Guard. He told me a story. There was a big fire in Boston, and they were stationed on the East Coast, and there were many people burned to death in that fire. And George was among the first group of Coast Guard people that went in it to pull the people out of that fire. And he said most of them were just burned to death, and it was very gruesome. After George, we had Tom. Am I on the right track, Deb? Tom Kotula was the only law enforcement officer in the family. Tom was, I think, police chief in Punxsutawney for a while, and then after he got out of that, he was with the Liquor Control Board with the state of Pennsylvania, and they went on a raid somewhere up northern Pennsylvania, and he got in late that night and died in his sleep overnight. Phil Kotula. We called him Winnie. Why, I don't know. Esther, can you tell me why they called him Winnie?
You don't know.
Anyway, it's his middle name.
His middle name was William.
Okay, they called him
I
Winnie.
think when he was little, we called him Mr. Brown. They brought him home and said his name was Phil William. That's how it was said.
I forgot one thing here. My father John and Fred Kotula married two sisters, the Collins girls, Josephine and Barbara Ellen. Of course, Tom Collins was the mine superintendent here, so that's the connection between the Kotulas and the Collins. The two brothers married two sisters. Okay, next in line was, I was talking about Phil. Phil went to school, and they called him Phil or Winnie, and he came home in first grade. His teacher was Margaret Collins. My Aunt Margaret was his first grade teacher. And he came home from school crying. And Bubba says, why are you crying? He said, the teacher called me Philip. But that was Phil. Phil was a great football player. He played for Punxsutawney High School. That's in the old days when the school was downtown, and they used to march right down the street to Harmon Field. The band would lead the football team, and you hear these cleats on the stone, and everyone from Punxsutawney, including the stores closed, went to the football game. And Phil was a good football player, and after he got out of high school and out of the service, he started a semi-pro team. And Du Bois had a team, Indiana had a team, but there's only one problem with Phil Kotula, and I want to tell you this. And the problem was that he was a Cleveland Browns fan in Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think Debbie's son's, because of Phil, is a Cleveland Brown fan.
Yes,
I used to kid Phil about that. And then Carl Kotula probably was the tallest of the Kotulas. A very handsome man also. He married a classmate of mine in high school. And I'm not going to tell you how old she is, but I'm going to be 81 and she's a week older than me. But we had a big class. We had 300 and some people. And I don't know if we ever met in high school. Did we?
No, I went to, I finished high school in Punxsutawney.
Okay. Anyway, her cousin was Kenny Turnbull, who was my best friend growing up. Kenny Turnbull had a cleft palate and never knew that he had a handicap. But we played football together, we played basketball, we played baseball, and Kenny won the half mile and mile 2 or 3 years running in Indiana County. And then he moved to Cleveland, and I was coaching at Homer City High School, Laura Lamar High School, and he used to come back, drive back from Cleveland just to be with us at the track meets, but he was a great guy. Okay, we're down to
Carrie.
Carrie.
Carolyn.
Carolyn Kotula. Vernon remembers Carolyn. Carrie was a blonde, and a pretty blonde, but she had a rheumatic heart, and she died at 21. And she was a wonderful young lady, but was sickly all of her life. But I think you should be proud of your heritage. You should be proud of your parents and your grandparents and what have you, because it's a great family, and I hope we continue with these reunions, because I think it's good to get together. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the history of the family and what a great family it is. And I'm proud to be a Kotula. Thank you. Any questions? Any questions?
When World War II was going on, were 7 of the boys all in service at the same time?
I think Dan and Pete. I think Dan and Pete were in the service and couldn't come home for Bubba Kotula's funeral. They didn't permit that in those days. But I think John Mark, he's more affectionately known as Duck Eye. Oh, Jedge, yeah, Jedge was in. George, we call George Jedge. And Pete, Bob, Jedge. I think some of the others may have been in towards the end of the war, but Dan was there 4 or 5 years, because Dan, before Dan always saved his money. He bought a brand new Nash, I think in probably 1939, and of course left the keys at home. When he came home, the car was all rusted and a wreck. But I think, Pete was the one. Dan stayed in London most of the time. He used to load bombs on the airplanes they used to bomb in France and Germany. But Pete was a guy that was wounded twice and suffered. Any other questions? He comes from a great family, be proud of him.